Peace and blessings. Happy holidays. I'm so incredibly delighted to be with your community again. And it's truly, truly an honor to be sharing my talk today. And the talk is titled A Celebration of Light, Viewing the Christmas Story Through the Mystical Lens. So as we are entering the winter solstice, the holiday season, regardless of what tradition we come from, or maybe we don't have a tradition we came from regarding the holidays, the Christmas story is a story that we can use as an indicator or a guidepost of how we can embrace the light within ourselves and be the light in the world. So what does it mean to interpret a story through the mystical lens? Very simply said, the mystical lens is a recognition that it's all happening within us. It's all an inner journey, much more so than an outer journey. When I was pretty early in my spiritual path, I became really fascinated with dream interpretation. And I remember reading books like, what does it mean if I dream about water in a dream? Or what does it mean if I'm in a car going really fast? And I kept finding all these different definitions. And then when I entered ministerial school at Unity, we were taught to use the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. Now, what was that? That was Charles Fillmore's interpretation of stories from the Bible. And once again, there was information there on what these certain words mean, what these concepts mean, what the different characters meant. And I realized at some point, although that was really helpful for me, at some point I recognized that it wasn't as important what someone else said about a way to interpret either a dream or a story. It was really about asking the question, what does this story mean to me? And that's what I'm inviting for you to take a look at. What does the Christmas story mean to you? What does it mean to celebrate light? Hanukkah celebrates light. A lot of the solstice traditions look at the light because so many people, at least in the northern hemisphere, we recognize that the longest night of the year is the solstice, somewhere around December 21st, and we're almost there. And so oftentimes what I hear people say about this time of year is we're moving back into the light. We're moving into having more light in our lives. And I do think that's important. I also want to add to the story that in addition to celebrating the light, we also want to honor and recognize the darkness and the importance of darkness. Nature gives us a lot of information. And I share this often, so if I shared this before, that's okay, because it seems to be what's present in this moment. If you imagine that you are planting a seed, you're not going to put it in direct sunlight, because if the seed only gets light, what happens? The seed won't grow. The seed will burn. The seed will actually not produce the plant that it's wanting to birth. What is needed is for it to go into fertile soil and to take some time there before the process of emerging into new life. And if you look at a human being, we spend 9 months or so in the womb, and that womb time is very important. Obviously, if a baby is born premature, they might have a lot of health issues and need a lot of extra attention. So the time in the womb, the gestation period, the time in the fertile soil, all of that is to be honored as well as the light. And so for me, if I look at this story of the birth of a new consciousness, because in New Thought teachings, that's what we say Christmas is. It's a recognition, it's a celebration, it's honoring the birth of a new consciousness. And that birth does not happen without also honoring the time in the darkness. And so as we move beyond duality, beyond the idea of good and bad and right and wrong, we can start to embrace all parts of the journey. And why is this important? It's important because if I don't honor the time in the darkness, the time tending to creating the conditions for growth, then the growth itself won't happen, or at least won't happen in the way that it wants to flourish. So let's break that down a little bit. The metaphor is obvious, but in my life, what that means is I honor through spiritual practice the preparation for the birth of a new consciousness. And it's very seductive to focus on the birth. Oh, I want more love in my life. I want more light in my life. And I know that that can be, or I'll speak for myself, that was a trap early in my journey in New Thought. Oh my gosh, I love this. I'm going to use affirmations and I'm going to have more love and light in my life. And of course, that's what I want. I'm imagining that's what we all want. More love, more connection, more light, more ease. And I also at one point recognized the importance of the practice of going within. And so the mystical interpretation of this celebration of light is to recognize what needs to be created, or what I need to embrace in order to create this birth of a new consciousness. And so if I move beyond the ideas that light is good and dark is bad, we've been deeply programmed to move beyond that program and to recognize the importance of all of it equally, then what gets born is so much more profound than what would get born when I'm chasing the light. So let's talk about what's happening in our world and in our country. It would be really easy right now to look at some of the conditions of the world and call them bad or wrong. With just a slight shift in awareness, we can begin to ask the question, what is wanting to get born? What is it we are preparing for during this time of seeming difficulty? And rather than rejecting that or thinking there's something bad here and we need to get rid of it, what if we could look at it through the lens of oneness? And I'll go a little deeper into this. We are beginning to recognize that there is one life. Now, unity and New Thought principles have been saying this for over 100 years. Some of the great mystical teachings have been saying this for thousands of years, that we are intrinsically all one. So if it's true that oneness is our birthright, oneness is the greater reality, then I also recognize that the evolution of consciousness is not only happening individually, or our perception of the individual, it also happens in the collective. This is important because it could be easy to think, well, there's not really much I can do about what's happening in the world. Or maybe, if you're anything like me, you might have been in, or maybe you are still sometimes, or in this moment, in the idea that we must fight. We must change what's happening in the world. When I recognize that really it's happening in consciousness, I recognize that the greatest gift I can offer the world is my own transformation into a deeper awareness of my true nature, of the oneness that exists at the core of life. And so what I'm not saying is we don't recognize the seeming differences or the seeming separation or even the seeming conflict that's happening in our world. What I am saying is we honor that, and at the same time, we recognize that there's something greater happening. There's a greater reality than division. So let's talk about the Christmas story and how it relates to what's happening in our world. If it's true that we are all one, and in my own individual journey, I recognized that a big part of my healing was bringing what was in the shadow or the darkness into the light, honoring it, looking at all the ideas, the beliefs, the concepts, the ideologies that I had in my unconscious that maybe I wasn't even aware of. And so in New Thought, I came into the idea of affirmations, affirm the light. But what I did, and I don't think this is what New Thought is suggesting, but how I interpreted it was reject the darkness and turn to the light. And then I realized the importance of this honoring what's in the shadow, honoring what I've buried deeply in my subconscious, and recognizing that as difficult as some of that may be to look at, to embrace, to even honor and celebrate, wow, I can even celebrate things that seem difficult. I can recognize that what needed to happen in my own journey is for what was in the darkness to come up to conscious awareness, to be honored, to be healed. And if it's true that we're all one, then we could also say that it's true that that's what's happening in our world today. There are unconscious beliefs, biases, and points of view that have been, in many ways, running the world, running the show. And what we're called to at this time, we're called to bring that into conscious awareness, and that's a moment-to-moment choice. To recognize that, yes, sometimes I can perceive that there is an other, but perceiving the other is at the root of all conflict, and quite frankly, the root of suffering. When I see myself as separate from other people, and to take it a little deeper, when I see myself as separate from source energy, God essence, essential beingness, the matrix, whatever word we use for this divine energy, when I see myself as separate from that, I suffer. When I honor the path that I've chosen, including the path of separating from that, which of course we know isn't true. We never really separate from source, but consciously I separated, or even unconsciously. Maybe I forgot the deeper reality, the truth, that each of us is a perfect expression of the one power. And that's unity's first principle. There is one power and one presence active in the world and in my life. God, the good, omnipotent. And if the word God doesn't work, we could say source, the infinite. And when I really understand that, not just intellectually, but experientially recognize that everything that has ever happened in my life has been an invitation to know that more deeply. Every relationship I've ever had, in all the joy and the love and the connection and all the discordance and the seeming separation and the pain, all of it has been there for me to awaken to a greater reality. So that's really the Christmas story to me. It is the symbolic birth of the light, the symbolic birth of a new consciousness, the symbolic birth of a new way of being and seeing, of recognizing that we can be the light in the world rather than seeking the light in the world. Let's take a moment with that. To be the light in the world rather than to seek the light in the world. That to me is freedom. That to me is purpose and meaning. And so as we celebrate and cultivate an awareness of what we might call the dark, the shadow, parts of ourselves that maybe we don't really want to admit are there, if I can look at that with compassion and understanding and recognize that everything that has happened can be an opportunity. I want to take a moment and really lean into something we hear a lot in our culture. It's very popular, and that is everything happens for a reason. When something difficult happens, maybe we say, well, everything happens for a reason. There's something good that's going to come from this. And of course, that can seem really true on one level. What I want to invite is not this or that, but this and that. Yes, that may be true. And it also may be true that life is happening, and I create the meaning of what just happened. One person can get a diagnosis that seems difficult, or we might even call horrible, and they have an experience of anger or why me, pain or sadness. And another person can receive that information and say, wow, What am I going to make the rest of my life mean? Now, what I'm speaking to here with the birth of a new consciousness is actually embracing and integrating all of those parts of ourselves. In other words, something happens, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel hurt. And guess what? It's also okay to feel joy and connection and love. Sometimes in the midst of something that seems so terrible, we have an opportunity, and sometimes we even have an instant awakening. Wow. Life is presenting me with an opportunity to more fully love myself and the world. I can honor the entire emotional experience. I think the new reality is really one of integrating all aspects of self: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. When we recognize that all four of those are valid, we can then embrace all those aspects of ourselves and ask the question, what gets created when I only live in physical reality? What gets created when I only live in intellectual reality? In other words, I'm going to figure all this out. What happens when I only live in emotional reality, honoring my feelings? Some might even say get stuck in my feelings. In my experience, the emotional room is an invitation to love ourselves more deeply. What if I decided whatever I'm feeling is perfectly appropriate? I worked with a woman once who had been the caretaker for her mother, who had been in the process of dying, or transitioning, as we say, for a decade. When her mother finally made her transition, she felt relief, she felt love, she felt light, she felt joy. And yet everyone kept saying, oh, you must be so sad that your mother died. And she felt like it wasn't okay for her to say, actually, I feel joy and relief for her, for me, for all involved. And so what is it like for us to honor whatever emerges? And then we move into this spiritual room that we could also call the mystical room, where we recognize that we have moved beyond duality. The new consciousness that has been born, that is represented by the Christmas story, by all the solstice celebrations, is that as we have integrated all parts of ourselves, we wake up to the greater reality that underneath all of it, at the core of all of it, is love, is source, is infinite beingness. And as we experience that, and as we integrate all parts of self, honoring the physical, honoring the intellectual, honoring the emotional, we can more quickly and more solidly move into the awareness that love is who we are, joy is who we are. That's our natural state. We came into the world as whole and perfect spiritual beings. And most of us have been programmed to believe all kinds of BS belief systems that have told us other than that. So the spiritual journey isn't really a destination as much as it is a remembering. And the Christmas story is a symbol of that. At any moment, I can tune into this greater reality. I can recognize that I am a perfect expression of love and of light. And that is the truth for you, and it's the truth for all living beings on planet Earth and in the cosmos. And that I'm not separate from that. And because we're not separate from that, we also have a divine purpose. Because as we awaken to our greater reality, our true nature, the world awakens. So if you want a shortcut to living a life filled with joy, love, and light, the shortcut is right in this moment, recognizing that there's a blueprint within you for a divinity. As a matter of fact, it's who and what you are. And the Christmas story represents the birth of that awareness. It's not really the birth of a new consciousness. It's a spontaneous awareness, a spontaneous insight. Our beloved Michael Bernard Beckwith says we grow in two ways, through pain or insight. The choice is yours. We grow in two ways, through pain or insight. The choice is yours. And this story represents that choice. This awareness that at any moment We can honor the conditions of the world. We can honor the conditions of physical reality. And we can also tap into this greater reality. The spiritual insight is quite simple: to recognize who we really are. And when we know that and we be that in the world, everything changes. This is the story, the mystical interpretation, the celebration of light. Thank you so much. I'm so deeply honored. And what I want to say in closing is very simple. You are the light of the world. You are the one who has been chosen right now to incarnate on planet Earth, to birth this greater reality. And again, the reality is really an awareness of that which has always existed. And so here we are, being called. Be the love, be the light, be the joy. So incredibly grateful. Peace and blessings.